Kia ora, good evening. Southland's air quality is set to improve with a new $1.5 million pilot being run from the region over the next 3 years. Southland was chosen to develop the renewable regional heat hub by the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority due to the region's lack of alternative fuels and its sustainable business and regional energy strategies. Findings will be shared nationwide, and the first part of the project involves consulting with industries that traditionally burn coal as the main heat source.
The early stage of the work is really speaking with boiler owners and people that have a particular need for large capacity heating systems, and really look at the near field opportunities for those people to convert. And the intention really is to try and have a conversation, help them through the feasibility study exercise, provide specific advice and technical advice, and also ultimately the business case for changing.
When you do discover the ones that might be an easy change or are interested in changing, what kind of cost and how might that be covered off by the business?
Well, initially for any type of biomass boiler systems, the capital cost is a little bit higher. However, the life cycle costs are significantly lower. And what we're finding now in the south is that we have very consistent, high quality wood chip available for boiler fuel, and that's making the decision an awful lot easier for many boards and commercial operators to make. We will, however, be looking at constant improvements in each of those areas, and hopefully this project will throw up some new opportunities for local business and employment as well.
The likes of schools and hospitals who are using large heating systems, would there be any likely government funding that might come through to help with that capital cost to change in the first place?
Yes, well, the fact that ECA is leading this particular project is a manifestation of government's will to actually change to lower emission fire systems and boiler systems, and it is a government funded initiative, and it is likely that with the passage of time we will see large users, schools, etc. Converting to wood energy, hospitals and so on. The reality, however, at present is that we have around about 7 schools that are making that commitment as we speak, and Ministry of Education are taking some significant leadership in this area, as are Environment Southland and a number of other industry players. And there's been some very good champions for the cause, early stage adopters, McCallum's Dry Cleaning, Splash Palace, 2 local examples, and Slinkskins and Thornbury are also advancing a biomass boiler system, wood chip fuelled. So, the people are seeing the light and are adopting this new kind of technology. While it is new to New Zealand, in actual fact, it's more the norm in Europe and Scandinavian countries. So we've got to pick up on some of their learnings as well.
New air traffic management systems are expected to shorten flight times, improve safety and lower carbon emissions, potentially saving New Zealand's aviation industry up to $2 billion. Transport Minister Jerry Brownlee unveiled plans last night that'll set the direction for the modernisation of New Zealand airspace and air navigation system. The plan outlines the transition from ground-based to satellite-based navigation and surveillance technologies, digital and communication systems and streamlined air traffic control. The Civil Aviation Authority will lead the sector changes and work with air operators to ensure those who don't invest in new equipment can still access as much airspace as possible. The viability of operating a paid parking service in Invercargill is looking marginal, with parking revenue declining by around half in the past 4 years. Parking patrol staff, transport administration and parking collection costs may not stack up in the long run, as Invercargill's central business district is not frequented by shoppers to the same degree.
We think if you go to other places like the warehouse, the farmers, those parks are always full. So that it could be a shift of the CBD to these sorts of areas. So yeah, and they're just not the people in the CBD as they used to be.
Also, do you think that the limitation of 1 or 2 hours maximum parking is making it difficult for people who are in business in town to support that type of parking system?
Yeah, it's certainly something we've got to look at, and I think from the feedback we've got is that the changing in the shops in these areas require, there might be a physiotherapist that you have to go in there for an hour. So the last thing you want to be is coming out feeding the meters. So this is something that I think in the CBD upgrade we'll have to have to consider.
Most of the parking meters are faced around retail shopping areas. Do you think the decline in retail shopping to perhaps online spending is having an impact too?
It's certainly, I think, something worth considering, and this is only going to get more used as we all, people my age, get into it, and it's certainly reflecting out there.
If it does continue to decline, which indications would certainly say that that is the case, what would the long-term option for parking be in the city?
Well, I think that's something for our political leaders to address. But I'm pleased to say that it looks like the revenue has picked up slightly this year and may not be as bad as we projected, but it's still hovering around that 50% mark.
If in fact it does get less than 350,000, is it really enough revenue? Are you perhaps better saying free parking for all in the city?
I think that's something we'll have to put to our politicians, but it's certainly a question that someone's going to have to ask.
Retailers would like that?
I'm sure they would, yes.
And Invercargill City Council have announced today that the parking team leader role will be combined with the animal services team leader role. Almost 1 in 4 New Zealanders were identified as disabled in 2013. That's a 20% increase since 2001. 1.1 million people, or 24% of the population, were identified as disabled, with 11% of children and 27% of adults limited in their daily activities by a range of impairments, the most common being physical limitations. The New Zealand Disability Study was carried out last year and involved over 23,000 children and adults, plus 1,000 adults living in residential care facilities. Figures released by Statistics New Zealand show just over half had more than one type of impairment. The most common cause of disability in adults was disease or illness. The 20% increased rate of disability is partly explained by our ageing population. Stay with us. Still to come on the bulletin, a new purpose-built rescue vessel for Bluff and growing up a Kiwi in the 21st century. Welcome back. Growing Up in New Zealand is a longitudinal study that provides an up-to-date population-relevant picture of what it's like to be a child growing up in New Zealand in the 21st century. The study tracked the development of approximately 7,000 Kiwi children, and some key findings include 71% of toddlers are watching TV, with 64% watching up to 3 hours daily. Our multicultural society is reflected in the fact nearly half of all 2-year-olds in New Zealand can understand more than one language. When it comes to health, 92% had been fully immunised at the age of 2. 97% saw their GP at least once in the past year. 6 was the average number of visits, and over 10% had seen their GP more than 10 times. And when it comes to safety, 1/3 of children up to the age of 2 have had a significant accident requiring medical help. Patrolling the South's notorious Fovo Strait will be made easier when Bluff Coast Guard's new rescue vessel hits the water next July. Replacing the existing 8.5 metre boat with a longer and wider fast response rescue vessel doesn't come cheap, but the $1.2 million needed is almost secured. Bluff Coast Guard have been working towards a new rescue vessel since 2008, when it was identified a new boat was due. Since then, almost $1.2 million has been raised, and a contract to build the boat designed by an independent naval architect has been signed.
It buys you a fairly serious piece of boat these days, $1.2 million. I mean, this vessel's 13 metres overall. It's a large vessel. It's just under 4 metres wide, so it's a big piece of boat. We're supposed to be, we've gone that size to make it safer for everyone, longer, but then that means it's heavier and it's bigger, and there's a lot more systems in it. We've got to have dual redundancy for everything, engines right through to whole life-saving, etc. So effectively we've got double the equipment that most boats have in them, so that's why they cost that much.
The current boat was inherited third-hand by Bluff Coast Guard and is small enough to fit on the deck of its replacement vessel.
It was a Coast Guard vessel owned by New Zealand Coast Guard, and then they just gave it to the various units as they needed it as it went through.
Bluff Coast Guard have purchased the new purpose-designed rescue boat's jet units, and a deposit's been paid on the engines. Operating costs aren't expected to change significantly.
There's a big difference between a petrol-powered outboard vessel and the diesel one that we're actually going to be building. The actual running costs are not going to be any different because the new one burns a lot of petrol, and the replacement for the engines is a lot higher. The engines and running gear in this new boat will last the life of the boat. So the actual running costs will be less, the maintenance costs will be slightly higher.
Coast Guard is a charity service and is only reimbursed for services if a rescue operation is requested by the police.
If we're not directly tasked by the police, then there's no recompense for our work. So they have to be in control of the incident and they have their protocols to work through. So if we do a Samaritan tow, if we're out there training and we pick somebody up, we could spend 3 or 4 hours towing them back in. All that cost has to be borne by the unit.
Samaritan work in the region isn't as high as other areas around the country, but when things do go wrong on the water, it can often be a major disaster.
With us, we don't get a huge amount of work, but the ones we do, as you've seen from the history, they are usually major ones. So, the Samaritan work would account for about 30-40% of it. The rest of it is just a major call-out.
Despite some funding from Coast Guard New Zealand, there's always money needed to support Samaritan work.
Yeah, we ended up with the Maritime New Zealand. We get about a 15% government grant. The rest of it is funded just through donations and what we can do fundraising wise. Our local regional office, they support us through maintenance grants and training grants, etc. But the last year we got $3,800 for running it. So at the moment, the ongoing costs for the boat would probably be $10,000 to $15,000. Yeah.
Bluff Coast Guard is hopeful they can recruit some long-term supporters at a quiz night on Thursday evening. Margot Southland, South Today News. Police are warning people not to fall for a recent scam being advertised around the country. The ad offers people to have their car wrapped in sign writing in exchange for a large payment. Anyone who replies to the advert is sent a cheque from the scammers with instructions to bank the cheque and transfer the banked money to an offshore bank account, which pays to have their car wrapped. The cheque later bounces, leaving the victim out of pocket and in most cases in debt to their bank for the total money transferred. Victims of the scam who haven't already spoken to police or those who may have any information relating to the scam are asked to call Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. And that's a wrap from the news desk this Tuesday. Sport follows, the weather along next after the news from the news team rather. Good night.